Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, it seems like this would be a good week to provide an update on the bull market support band. As I mentioned, with the exception of yesterday, a lot of my videos for the past week were all pre-recorded more than a week ago, so I haven't really been providing real-time updates in a little while. But if we go through what we've talked about this year, I think you'll see that the path has largely been correct, right? So the first thing we talked about was a local top on January 20th. And the reason for that was basically the idea that we would be pricing in perfection, right? You have the new administration coming in. You have, the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, Gary Gensler being fired and whatnot. And you just have market participants pricing in what they think is perfection. And so it made sense to get a correction following January 20th. We mentioned we would likely see weakness in the market between February OPEX, options expiration, and early April. And we said that if we stay above 73K, which is the 2024 high, then the Q2 rally could lead to a new all-time high. And it did, right? So we stayed above the 2024 high when we had this pullback, right? We stayed above it. And then this rally led to a new all-time high. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the Golden Cross and the Death Cross this year, right? If you look at it like this, and we'll get to the bull market support band in a minute. When you look at it like this, what you'll see is that the Death Cross marked a low and the Golden Cross marked a high. And this is one of these things we've talked about for years, how often this will happen, where it's the opposite of what you think, right? When you see the Death Cross, people are freaking out, but usually it marks a low. It even marked a low in 2024. It marked a low in 2023 as well. And you can see it marked a low in 2025. But Golden Crosses can also sometimes mark at least local tops, right? So what I'm thinking right now, let's pull back up the bull market support band. What I'm thinking right now is, so the first thing we had, let's just go through the script, if you will, for the year, right? So we first had a local top on January 20th, right? Pricing perfection, right? So that's completed. The second thing was a correction into early April. These were all things we talked about well in advance, right? A correction into early April. And one of the reasons for that is there's plenty of times in post-election years where you will see corrections in the early part of the year, right? And a lot of times there'll be a low around March or April, okay? Now, not always, but there's plenty of examples for that. Not necessarily with Bitcoin, but in the stock market. If you look at like the 1970s, some of the 1980s, a little bit of the 1960s, if you look at 2001, plenty of examples where you have sort of the market finds a local top around the change in administration, and then you get a sell-off into March/April, where you basically reach like peak uncertainty as to how the new administration is going to affect financial markets. And then what often happens is you get a rally in the second quarter of the year, followed by another slump in the third quarter of the year. So we had our local top on January 20th, pricing in perfection. We had a correction into early April. Now, fortunately, Bitcoin stayed above, let's say greater than 73K. And because it stayed greater than 73K, it meant the market structure was intact and a new all-time high was theoretically in the cards. Then we had our Death Cross, right? We called for the Death Cross rally, and we got our Death Cross rally, right? We had the Death Cross, we got our Death Cross rally, and then we got our Golden Cross, and we said to expect a Golden Cross dump. Okay. And that's kind of where we are right now. But what I'm thinking, the next step here is the the clear sort of short-term obvious thing that would make the most amount of sense to me. But listen, sometimes the most obvious thing doesn't necessarily play out, right? Markets are, can do all sorts of things that I might not expect. But if you were to say what is the most likely outcome over the next few weeks, what I would say is Bitcoin goes to the bull market support band. Now, the bull market support band right now ranges from around 94 to 96K. Really, it's almost 95 to 97K. Let's just call it mid 90s. Okay? Let's call it mid 90s. I think the most likely outcome in the short term is that Bitcoin goes to around approximately 95K. Approximately. That's basically where you have the bull market support band right now. What you'll notice is that last year, Bitcoin also dropped to the bull market support band in late June. And the year before, while it had a rally in June, it did eventually drop down there by August. Now, what you'll notice is that in both prior years, Bitcoin dropped below the bull market support band in August and September. Okay? Now, I've been pretty clear about my base case. I could be wrong. I'm constantly searching for signs that would make me think I'm wrong, right? But what I think right now is that there will likely be a drop below the bull market support band in sort of the Q3 timeframe, right? The Q3 timeframe. Now, one of the interesting things, if you look at the last 2 years, the 50-week moving average came into play, right? So if you look at Q3, in both 2023 and 2024, you can see that Bitcoin held above the 50-week moving average on weekly closes. And in Q1, Bitcoin held above the 50-week SMA on weekly closes, right? So we haven't really had a weekly close below the 50-week moving average. Well, the 50-week moving average right now is around 85K, right? 85K. So what I'm thinking right now is the most likely short-term outcome is a drop to the mid-90s, right? Now, we could hold there until later on in Q3, potentially. I do think there's a good chance that Bitcoin could go back down to its 100-week moving average, sometime in the third quarter of the year. All right. So the way I view it is like this. I see 3 primary outcomes to consider over the next, let's call it July, August, September, October, let's call it 4 months or so, right? So we have the optimistic view, we have the pessimistic view, and then we have kind of something in between, which maybe we should focus on the something in between a little bit more. But the first thing we'll say, optimistic view, would just be that Bitcoin holds at 95K, right? Holds here at the bull market support band, and the bears don't have enough ammo to get it any lower than that, right? That's the optimistic view. It's possible, right? It's possible. Maybe, 20% chance, right? Maybe 20% chance of that. And that it just goes to the bull market support band and holds there. I would say a slightly higher chance of testing the 100-week SMA at some point, but it's probably not going to be immediate, right? If it's going to test it, what would likely happen is it would consolidate, up over here for a little while before giving in to that, right? And so the optimistic view basically just says, if you have this sort of a path to draw out, it would just say, all right, down here, maybe just consolidate for a little while and then up. All right, that's sort of the optimistic view. A more moderate view would be something like this, down to the 100-week SMA by, let's call it September, and then a bounce back up into sort of the typical October timeframe. right? And then at that point, it'll time to figure out if we're actually going to get another run up or not, or if that's it, right? The pessimistic view, like the worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario that I could see for Bitcoin for Q3 would be testing this thing, right? I don't know how likely it is, but if we did test that, you would likely get a big bounce back up. So you might say, well, Ben, hold on a second. You know, you're showing three different paths, right? Why can't you just pick one? Well, first of all, let's get past the illusion that anyone knows what the hell is going to happen. None of us do, right? None of us have a clue. And so the idea that any of us do is somewhat absurd, right? And I mean, I think the paths we've drawn out this year have been pretty accurate for the most part. Sort of the base case has been pretty accurate. Local top January 20th, drop into early April, Death Cross rally, Golden Cross dump, right? We've caught all that stuff. It gets trickier, you know, as you get closer to midterm years, because normally in midterm years, Bitcoin goes down. It's an unfortunate thing, right? It's just kind of how the markets worked. Could this time be different? Anything's possible. But normally you have your 2014, 2018, 2022. So I'm somewhat operating deterministically here that 2026 will be a bad year for Bitcoin, right? I'm operating under that assumption. But the point that I'm trying to draw with these paths here is that no matter, and again, this could be a faulty assumption, but no matter the path that Bitcoin takes, whether it just drops a little bit and consolidates, whether it drops to the 100-week SMA and then gets a little bit of a move back up, or whether it goes all the way down here and then bounces back up, there's a good chance that no matter which of these three paths it takes, it could all still be around the same price by October, right? And that's kind of the point that I'm trying to make. And the reason we talk about this is we talked about the exact same thing back in February, right? What we said back over here was that we were likely going to get a drop, right? We were likely going to get this drop, this sort of post-election year seasonal drop when you have high inflation, or at least inflation is an issue and the labor market's an issue. You normally get this drop. And so what I said back then was, look, if you want to hold something and you just don't want to sit in cash and you want to be in crypto, you're better off holding Bitcoin than basically anything else. Because there's a really good chance that come the second quarter of the year, Bitcoin will still be the same price. Even if it does go down here, right? Even if it does go down here, it'll probably still be the same price as it was right here. And here we are near the end of the second quarter, and ta-da, right? It's the same price, basically. But the altcoin market is not the same price, right? That's the point that I'm trying to make. If you look at total 3, it's not the same price. You know, the altcoin market is down a lot since then. And so the point here is that if you're going to stick with something besides cash, right? If you're going to stick with something in crypto, you're still probably better off with Bitcoin than the altcoin market, right? You probably are. And that's why we spent so much time talking about Bitcoin dominance, which, by the way, it just hit 66%. That's something we've talked about for a long time, that it would likely hit that 66% level. It actually did so earlier today. So I wish I could tell you, you know, for a fact what's going to happen, right? What I would say is there's a good chance that come late October, Bitcoin could very well be around this price over here. Maybe even a little bit higher, right? It's possible to be a little bit higher. But I'm going to guess it's going to be around these prices by then, right? The only difference between, the only thing that's more difficult to sort of figure out is what is the path to get there, right? Is it just this? Is it this? Or is it this? That's the hard part. Now, you might say this might be too bearish. And it very well could be, right? It very well could be. The only reason I'm looking at that, and this is something we've talked about before, is that if you look at 2023, there was this similar pattern, right? Where you had slightly higher highs and then slightly lower lows. But look at 2023. You'll see that Bitcoin stayed above the 50-week moving average, right? It did not, while it put in these higher highs in the lower lows, it did not actually tag this lower low here. This time, we'll see. We got the higher highs again. It's the same thing as 2023. We have the lower lows. It just seems like there's a good chance that, realistically speaking, by Q3, we'll probably be somewhere over here, right? We'll probably be somewhere over here, if I had to guess. Now, I know that this might go against some of the other models that people are looking at. I know there's a lot of people that are really big proponents of sort of the delayed M2 chart and whatnot. But, I mean, I do often have a problem with that because I do think that Bitcoin leads rather than lags. And that's my base case, right? I know that a lot of people just think that we can just shift over the global money supply by a few months and get a chart that's going to tell us exactly where Bitcoin's going to go. But the issue with that is that all prior cycles, that lagged chart did not predict the tops, right? So I would not use that chart by itself to tell you, when the market cycle top is going to be, because there's a good chance that liquidity will continue to go up globally well after Bitcoin has found that top, okay? So what I'm thinking right now is a pullback to the bull market support band over the next few weeks. I think that's the optimistic view, right? That's sort of like the most optimistic view is just consolidate here. If it can do that, that would actually look pretty good for Bitcoin going into Q4. I think a more realistic view is here, right? But I think it's going to take until later on in Q3 to get there. Something potentially between 85K and 95K. If I had to put out the probabilities, I would say 20% chance of holding support at the bull market support band. I would say 60% chance that we hold support between the bull market support band and the 100-week SMA. And then third, 20% chance that we test this trend line. Right? Which would be, to basically be all the way down at 60K. That would be a really big drop. And I think you would have to have a recession, actually, to get that to occur. This pattern, by the way, of testing that trend line already occurred in Total 2. So Bitcoin is a big reason why the asset class is doing well at all, right? I mean, it really is. If you look at Total 2, look at this chart. Look at the lower high structure. I mean, it already tested that, right? And you can see that after it tested it, it got a big rally, right? It got a really big rally back up. So my point here is that I don't know how low it's going to go, right? Before it finds renewed strength. I can't know, right? I can't know. I don't have a crystal ball. What I would say is that it's more of a time-based thing rather than a price target, right? If you look at the last 2 years, the low last year was found in August, and the year before that, the low was found in September. In the third quarter, right? The third quarter low was August and September. And so I would be looking for a low around that time frame. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin can't go up between now and then, right? It could. What I'm just saying is that I would expect a low in the market around August or September, okay? So, it could look something like this, where it chops around here for a little bit, goes down into August, and then gets a move back up, right? It could look something like that. It could look something like this, where it just consolidates, or it could be a bigger drop and then back up. If it's a bigger drop, right, here's the thing, and I'll say the same thing I said last year. As long as we hold support above these prior levels, right? As long as we don't break the 2024 high and don't put in a lower low, then the market structure remains intact. For instance, if Bitcoin can just simply stay above the 100-week moving average, then the odds that the next rally in Q4 lead to a new all-time high are really high, right? As long as we can stay above the 50-week moving average. One of the things you should know, just thinking about for later this year, is that with the exception of, I mean, I guess, I don't even, I mean, look, in 2021, there was like basically a weekly close right at that 50-week moving average. But here's the thing. Every prior cycle, when Bitcoin closes 2 weekly candles below the 50-week moving average, the cycle's over, right? It's over at that point, okay? So think about that, right? When that happens, I'm not saying use that as an indicator to figure out when to sell, because by that point, the bear market's already halfway over. But you can see that when you get 2 weekly closes below that level, cycle's over. So this is the thing to watch for going into the third quarter this year. All right, this is the thing to watch for. If Bitcoin stays above the 50-week moving average, then the next rally that would likely, potentially start in Q4 would likely lead to an all-time high. If, on the other hand, Bitcoin goes below the 50-week moving average and tests this, then the next rally would likely be a lower high rally. Okay? It's not a price target thing. It's a timing thing, right? There's likely going to be a low around August or September. And there's likely going to be a rally on the other side of that. The only thing to consider is whether that rally leads to a higher high or a lower high. That's the main thing to consider. I'm operating under the assumption right now that 2026 will be a bear market, right? I know that's going to make some people upset, right? But 2014 was a bear market. 2018 was a bear market. 2022 was a bear market. 2026 is probably going to be a bear market. The only question will be, will the next rally that Bitcoin gets, which may occur around Q4, will lead to new all-time highs? I hope it does lead to new all-time highs. I think it very well could lead to all-time highs. And maybe there is even a chance, where even in the worst case scenario, where Bitcoin is just bouncing around here, let's say this year it actually goes all the way back down here, despite the fact that in 2023 it didn't. There is even a chance that even in this outcome, Bitcoin could still come back up to a new all-time high and even break through potentially, right? So I think there's still plenty of time to go. One of the things to consider, again, is that there is all this liquidity that remains in the altcoin market. And because quantitative tightening continues, this liquidity in the altcoin market will likely eventually make its way back over to Bitcoin. So what I would say is this. I mean, right now, Bitcoin's over 100K. I think there probably will be some time in Q3 we'll spend below 100K. Does it make sense to prepare for that? Maybe, right? Maybe. Depends on what you want to do, how you want to navigate that. I think there'll be some time spent below 100K. There will likely be another move back up, potentially around the Q4 timeframe. Whether it leads to a new all-time high or not will be dependent on how low Bitcoin goes in the current drop that we're in. If we hold the bull market support band, that would be a good thing. If we can hold above the 50-week SMA, that would look good as well. If we go all the way down here and we get another big drop, that would not be as good, right? And one way to visualize, like if you're not sure, like if you don't really know where I'm coming from, one thing to think about is if you go to the year-to-date ROI of the stock market. This is something I keep looking at because I'm curious how this is going to play out. If you look at like 2025 and then you compare it to all these other post-election years where inflation and the unemployment rate were not very well behaved, you can see that we're basically at an inflection point right now, right? Like you can see that in all these other post-election years, there was a rally in Q2, But then as you got closer to Q3, the rally stalled and faded, and then we went down into August, September. Look at 1980, though. We're at a major crossroads right now, right? Does the stock market follow 1980, or does it start to roll over into August, September? If it rolls over into August and September and goes a little lower than it was in March and April, that would obviously present a problem for risk assets in crypto as well. Because if the stock market's dropping, obviously, there's a good chance that Bitcoin would drop too. The thing to consider, though, is that Bitcoin has actually done a lot better than the stock market, because despite the fact that Bitcoin set a new all-time high, the stock market did not. So Bitcoin has been one of the best performing assets this cycle, and that's one of the reasons we talk about Bitcoin dominance so much. I don't talk about the downside to scare you or anything like that. It's more so just so you can figure out what opportunities may lie ahead, and to prepare for those outcomes. So I don't know the exact path. I would say the bull market support band for Bitcoin seems like a likely short-term target of around 95K. If you told me that Bitcoin went to 85K in Q3, I wouldn't be that surprised, right? I'd say, yeah, it did it last Q3, 50-week SMA. Q3 before that did the same thing, right? Below the bull market support band, but above the 50-week moving average. So if it did it in Q3 again, same old, right? It's the same thing we saw the last 2 years. A close below the 50-week moving average would really call into question, the integrity of the next rally, right? Doesn't mean there wouldn't be a next rally. It probably would be. It would just mean, it could be, that could be sort of the final one if we get really closes below the 50-week moving average. Because usually what happens is after you get a close below the 50-week moving average, or you sort of sweep it, you can get another sort of knee-jerk rally back up, but it doesn't necessarily always go that much higher at that point. And you can see even over here, that's kind of what's happening. So we'll take it 1 week at a time. I would say base case is we'll see Bitcoin back at the bull market support band before too long, and we'll take it 1 week at a time. But I'm thinking a low around August or September, and then on the other side of that, we should see another rally, and then whatever rally comes after that, the extent of that rally depends on on how far down the weakness in the third quarter is. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.